Well, hi there, everybody. I'm Andy Stanley, and I'm so honored you've invited me to be a part of your group for the next few weeks, the next few days, or if you're a binge watcher, maybe just the next few hours. Whatever the case, thank you. And on behalf of the folks closest to you, the folks who depend on you, thanks for setting aside some time to discuss a topic that intersects and influences the direction of your life and consequently influences the direction of their life as well, every single day. In fact, multiple times a day. Namely, we're talking about decision making. Your decisions have and will continue to determine the direction and the quality of your life. And if that's not motivation enough to get this right, your decisions determine the direction and quality of other people's lives as well. So let's jump in. And I can't think of a better way to begin our time together than with a story about one of my favorite people and perhaps one of your favorite people as well, my dad. When I was a kid, my dad had a terrible habit. At least I thought it was a terrible habit. He wouldn't tell me what to do. Specifically, he wouldn't tell me what to do when I didn't know what to do, and I wanted him to tell me what he thought I should do. Now, I know most kids don't want their parents telling them what to do, and I was like most kids most of the time, but on occasion, I wanted him to tell me what to do, and he wouldn't. Worse, instead of answering my questions, he would ask me questions. And his go-to question was this. He would say, Andy, what are you going to do when I'm not around to tell you what to do? It would just drive me crazy. And my go-to response to his go-to question is, Dad, but you are around, so tell me. Now, of course, my dad's go-to question wasn't his only question. During middle school and high school, his arsenal of questions included one of the 5 questions that we're going to explore later. He would say, Andy, what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? Now, as a teenager, that question usually eliminated most of my preferred options. But, when I took it seriously, it actually eliminated a lot of unnecessary regret as well. Now, what I didn't appreciate then that I most certainly appreciate now was why. Why all the questions? Why not just tell me what to do? And you can probably guess the answer to that question, right? He was more interested in teaching me how to make decisions than he was in making decisions for me. Now, granted, he started early, and maybe he started too early, but to his credit and to my advantage, he started while the stakes were low. Because as a kid, right, not very much hung in the balance of my decisions. But he knew that that would change with time. And he wanted me to be ready. And here's the funny thing. I've actually employed this same strategy with my kids, or at least I've tried to anyway. Who knows, maybe one day they'll write a book about it. Now, unbeknownst to my dad, he was actually teaching me something else as well. And that something else is actually the point of our time together. By opting for questions over direction, my dad connected 2 very important dots for me. In fact, I think these are dots most adults never connect. He helped me make the connection between good questions and good decisions. Good questions and good decisions. To tease that out a bit, he helped me make the connection between well-placed, appropriately timed, thought-provoking questions and good decision-making. Or simply put, good questions lead to better decisions. And better decisions always lead to fewer regrets. This is why on the backside of a bad decision, it's not unusual to hear someone say something like, I should have asked more questions. And why do they say that? Because, well, we know intuitively that the more questions we ask, the more information we have, which leads to greater insight and hopefully better decisions. But pausing to ponder a list of potentially disruptive questions is not easy, and it's certainly not intuitive. In fact, the truth is, let's be honest, most of us resist uninvited questions when we're making a decision, right? In fact, in the moment, we feel like we're being questioned rather than simply being asked a question. And there's a big difference between the two. And when we confuse one for the other, our defenses go up and our learning aptitude goes down. In fact, it is virtually impossible, you know this, it is virtually impossible to welcome new information and insight when we're convinced that, somebody's questioning our judgment. And this is especially true when we're making personal decisions. After all, they're personal. Translated, it's nobody's business. But let's be honest, and we're going to come back to this. You've never made a personal decision that didn't become somebody's business, right? In fact, every decision we make impacts somebody, and it's usually the folks closest to us. And there's no getting around this. There's no getting around the fact that well-placed, Appropriately timed, thought-provoking questions result in better decisions and fewer regrets. Now, I'll tell you who gets this. A good counselor gets this. If you've ever been in counseling, you've experienced this. Good counselors understand that that we're far more inclined to follow through on decisions we make rather than advice prescribed to us by other people, right? So counselors, you know what counselors do? They scatter breadcrumbs along our path to lead us toward making our own good decisions. And what are those breadcrumbs? You guessed it. They're well-placed, appropriately timed, thought-provoking questions. So, what if you knew the questions ahead of time? What if you had a list of questions that you could ask yourself when faced with an important decision? Imagine the money you would save by avoiding all those trips to the counselor, right? I'm kidding. Sort of. I mean, seriously, imagine having a list of questions that serve as the grid or the filter by which to evaluate your options every time you're making a decision. And if the idea of a decision-making grid sounds odd to you, it shouldn't, because you already have one. In fact, you use it every day. You just aren't aware of it. But every time you make a decision, you unconsciously ask a series of questions. Questions like, will this make me happy? Will I enjoy this? Will this hurt anybody? Will anybody find out? Now, while some of the questions that we intuitively ask ourselves are helpful, others really aren't, especially those first two questions, right? In fact, those first two questions are essential ingredients in the recipe of regret. So, my purpose in this study is to give you the questions ahead of time. Not all the questions, but 5 questions I'm absolutely convinced will result in better decisions and fewer regrets. Essentially, I want you to add 5 questions to your existing arsenal of questions. 5 questions to ask every single time you make a decision of any consequence. And these questions are so simple that when you see the list, you may wonder if you even need to finish this study. And of course, that's up to you. But before you go looking for your receipt, I want you to consider this. There is no necessary correlation. There is no necessary correlation between knowing and doing. None. Now, there should be, but there isn't. Knowing the questions to ask and actually pausing to ask the questions are 2 completely different things. And although we've never met, I can promise you this: developing the discipline to pause and ask these 5 questions will result in better decisions, and it will result in fewer regrets. So, I hope you'll finish this study, because if you do, these 5 questions will begin to inform your conscience and in that way become a permanent feature in the decision-making process for you. So, here they are. Question number 1. The integrity question. Am I being honest with myself, really? Number 2, the legacy question. What story do I want to tell? Number 3, the conscience question. Is there attention that deserves my attention? Number 4, the maturity question. What is the wise thing to do? And number 5, the relationship question. What does love require of me? Now, in sessions 2 through 6, we're going to unpack each of the 5 questions. But for the remainder of this session, I want to highlight one really important but easy to miss relationship between your decisions and your future. Now, it goes without saying, and I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I need to say it anyway. You are where you are because of the decisions you've made, right? Now, you may push back a bit because, it's not that simple. It wasn't just your decisions that landed you where you are today, and I get that. We're going to talk about that. But for the most part, you are where you are because of decisions that you've made. But here's the corollary that's just as obvious, but for whatever reason, we overlook it as well. Your future will be determined by your decisions as well. Your decisions, along with your responses to other people's decisions, which are also your decisions, are about the only thing you can control in your life. They're about the only thing I can control in my life, right? Which means, and don't miss this, your decisions are how you control your life. Decisions are your steering wheel. They're your joystick, your trackpad, which means, and this is big, your decisions determine your story, the story of your life. And every single decision becomes a permanent part of that story, which means we would be wise to stop at every decision-making junction and consider the story that we want to tell. But perhaps even more compelling, we should consider what story we want told about us, right? And the good news is this: You get to decide, but you decide one decision at a time because you write the story of your life one decision at a time. Now, to repeat something I stated earlier, your decisions determine the direction and the quality of your life. Your decisions have shaped the direction and the quality of your life so far, for good or maybe not so good. Again, you are where you are for the most part because of decisions you've made. So yeah, it's your fault. And I thought we should just get that out of the way up front. But it's not all bad news. Regret and disappointment aren't the only things spilling out of your decision pipeline. Your greatest joys, your greatest accomplishments are as well. But the moral of the story is simply this, that regardless of how things are going or have gone, you are responsible. You are responsible for you. You wrote the story so far. And here's the good news. You get to write the next several chapters as well. And these 5 questions are designed to help you write a good one, perhaps a great one, which leads me to this. If you're like most people, you'd like to go back and unmake a few decisions from the past, right? Decisions that led to chapters of your life you wish you could go back and unlive or relive. Chapters you'd like to rewrite. And perhaps you emerge from that not so glorious season of life committed to making better decisions in the future. And perhaps you have. But oddly enough, most people don't. And here's why. Most people don't learn from bad decisions because they're convinced their bad decisions were somebody else's fault. So as long as they stay away from somebody else, no change is required on their part. You've seen that. Perhaps you've lived that. And my hope is this, that these 5 questions change that for you. After all, nobody plans to complicate their life with a bad decision. The problem is, and what moved me to share this content is this, far too many people don't plan not to. They don't plan not to complicate their lives with unnecessary, avoidable bad decisions. They don't put simple safeguards in place to ensure a more happily ever after ending. And here's the thing, these 5 questions are your safeguards. And we all need safeguards, which sounds a little bit bold for me to say considering we've never met. But here's what I know about you. You may not be good at selling anything to anybody else, but when it comes to selling yourself on a bad idea, you are masterclass, right? Me too. Our greatest regrets are always associated with things or opportunities or people that we sold ourselves on, right? I mean, think back to your last bad relationship decision. It seemed right at the time. You were in love or you were in lust or you were in something, and whatever it was, you were in it. And your mama tried to warn you and your best friend tried to warn you, but you assured them that you knew what you were doing. And, at the time, you were sure that you knew what you were doing. But looking back, you think, what was I doing? I should have known better. I should have listened. But instead of listening, you were selling. You were selling who? You were selling yourself. This is true for this last bad purchasing decision you made as well, right? I mean, once you had your heart set on it, whatever it was, well, it was over. It was like something took over. It's like the next thing you knew, you're handing your credit card to someone you don't even know to buy something you don't need and perhaps you can't or shouldn't afford. And why? Because you sold yourself. It turns out, no offense, you're a sucker for you. We'll explore this again, this very odd dynamic in more depth later. But in case later never comes, here's the thing. I'll go ahead and say it. As soon as you start selling you on anything, you should hit the pause button. As soon as you catch yourself selling you on something to you, you should hit the pause button. And here's why. Don't miss this. We rarely have to sell ourselves on a good idea, right? We just know, don't we? So, your future decisions will determine the direction and the quality of your life. And here's the scary part. We don't know who or what hangs in the balance of those decisions. So we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to others, maybe especially others, to consider the potential long-term outcomes of our decisions. After all, it takes a lifetime for the outcome of some decisions to play out, right? In some cases, it takes generations. In fact, in the book, I give 2 examples from history, but right now, I want you to think about your history. Think about how different your life would be if your parents or your grandparents had decided differently about a few key things. Your parents and grandparents made some, what seemed to them to be small, insignificant decisions that determined the trajectory of your life. They weren't thinking about you at the time. In fact, you weren't even around to be thought about. But you've been impacted by their decisions, for better or for worse. Again, we never know. We never know what or who hangs in the balance of the decisions that we make. But what we do know is this: private decisions have public outcomes. Your private decisions probably will not stay private, and your personal decisions, they're going to impact some other persons. Now, I know you want to get this right. I know you want to write a story worth telling, and I'm convinced you can. And these five questions, when asked consistently, will ensure your fingerprints on the future will be fingerprints worth celebrating. That's it for me. Next time, we'll dive into the first of our 5 questions, the integrity question, and now it is your turn to talk. Enjoy the discussion.